Neurological Disorders Lesson 1.4, How do our brains interpret the environment? The goals of this lesson are to demonstrate some of the many tasks our brains do every day and to demonstrate the difference between sensation and perception. At the end of this lesson, students should be able to describe the difference between sensation and perception, name and locate the parts of the brain responsible for the five senses, and identify the frontal lobe and insular cortex as regions responsible for resolving conflicting sensory information. We'll achieve these goals by watching and discussing a video and through a sensation and perception station lab. To prepare for this lesson, you'll need to review the key scientific concepts presented in it. They include the difference between sensation and perception, sensation being the immediate and basic experience generated when stimuli activate our sensory systems, and perception being the interpretation of those sensations. The lesson will also discuss the brain regions responsible for processing our five senses, resolving conflicting sensory information, and the creation of perceptual illusions. You can review the scientific content in the background reading provided to you in the teacher primer, the teacher manual, and the student workbook. The teacher primer provides in-depth knowledge about the scientific content presented in the lesson. The teacher manual or lesson plan provides a minute-by-minute explanation of the lesson structure, including instructions on how to manage the discussion and activity. And the student workbook provides additional explanation for students. You'll need to be sure to print several documents to prepare for this lesson. And caution, there are several different materials to gather to be prepared to teach this lesson. To print, you will need lab worksheets for each student and printed materials for the lab. All of these can be reused in following years, so it might be a good idea to either laminate them or put them in sheet protectors. Those lab printed materials include station directions, station explanations, Stroop posters number 1 and 2, those do need to be printed in color, a blind spot booklet, again, needs to be printed in color, the context of color booklet, again, needs to be printed in color, and a moving experience booklet, again, needing to be printed in color. This lesson also has several additional materials that we will need to create or obtain to run the Sensation and Perception Station Lab. They include a mirror box, which can be purchased online or made easily by attaching a mirror to the side of a box. You can find a 12 by 12 mirror at many craft stores, usually within the wedding section and most home improvement stores. You also need objects 1 and 2. To create these, you need 2 opaque containers that look identical, except that one is twice as large as the other. You'll fill both with weights such that they weigh exactly the same. You can find great containers for this, again, at a craft or home improvement store. Once they're filled and weighted the same, it will feel like the smaller one is quite a bit heavier than the larger one. If the illusion isn't obvious to you, add more weight to both and try again. You also need a scale. This is so students can confirm that objects 1 and 2 actually weigh the same. Computer with headphones, and you need headphones because students will listen to an illusion of 2 tones, which makes it sound like one tone is played in one ear and the other tone is played in the other ear, when in fact both tones are played to both ears, which can only be confirmed when you use headphones by listening through just one headphone. You also need buckets of warm, cold, and room temperature water. The buckets need to be large enough to hold water and allow students to submerge one hand. And if you decide to include a tasting station, you'll need miracle berries, which can be bought online for approximately $1 a tablet. You can give each student either a whole or half of a tablet and the foods for tasting. It's great to have foods representing each taste quality: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, umami, or meaty. In the past, I've had students bring in the food like a potluck. And finally, you'll need to double check that the embedded videos on PowerPoint slides 9 and 14 will play on your classroom computer. Most teachers have not had a problem playing them, but in case you do, it's best to find out in advance instead of during class. If you do have problems playing the videos within the PowerPoint slides, you can download them from the ND Multimedia Backup. A link to this backup is provided on the webpage for Lesson 1.4. The key point of the do now is to review the brain regions involved in processing sensory information. The temporal lobe is responsible for hearing and smell, the parietal lobe for touch and taste, and the occipital lobe for vision. We'll get to these key points by having students review last night's homework with a partner in which they predicted which areas of the brain would be active as someone experienced different sensations. The key points of the discussion are to review the brain regions involved in processing sensory information and the difference between sensation and perception. We'll get to these key points with a Socratic discussion and watching and discussing a video. The first part of the discussion and lesson PowerPoint allow you to quickly review the areas of the brain responsible for processing our 5 senses. Slides 3 through 7 are animated, so you'll be able to ask the students which lobe is responsible for each of the senses: vision, touch, hearing, smell, and taste, and then animate to display the correct answer. Students should remember all of these answers from Lesson 1.2, and they reviewed them again in their homework last night and just reviewed them in the Do Now, so this should go very quickly. The second part of the discussion gets to the key point of the lesson, the difference between sensation and perception. You'll ask the students to define sensation. Students typically come up with the idea that sensation refers to the detection of the senses. You'll then animate the slide to display the definition we'll use in this course, and one that students should know. Sensation is the immediate and basic experience generated when stimuli activate our sensory systems. You'll then ask the students to define perception. Students can struggle with this question, and that's okay. After discussing it for a minute, you'll animate this slide to display the definition we'll use. Perception is the interpretation of our senses. You'll then ask the students what's the difference between sensation and perception. Again, students can sometimes struggle with this. After discussing for a minute, you'll animate the slide to show the key differences. Perceptions vary widely among us, and barring a disorder of some kind like blindness or deafness, sensations are pretty constant among us. The next slide contains a short video of a selective attention test that demonstrates the difference between sensation and perception. Before playing the video, instruct students to pay close attention to and remain quiet so as not to distract others. After watching the video, you'll discuss it. For students who haven't seen it before, most are able to correctly count the number of times the players pass the ball, but most miss the gorilla. Not because their visual system didn't detect it, but because their brains filtered it out because they thought it was unnecessary information. Another great video demonstrating the same thing is Who Done It, available on YouTube. It's only 2 minutes long, and it's another demonstration of how we only pay attention to a fraction of the things within our environment. You'll then point out the 2 brain areas involved in reconciling sensory information, the frontal lobe and insular cortex. We'll be testing these 2 areas as we complete the lesson's activity. The key points of the activity are to allow students to experience the difference between sensation and perception, as well as the creation of perceptual illusions, which happens because our brains are trying to resolve conflicting sensory inputs. We'll get to these key points with a sensation and perception station lab. The lab works best if you have it set up prior to students arriving in the room. For additional instructions on setting it up, please read the setup directions included in the materials folder for this lesson. For the lab, you'll give each student a lab worksheet and divide them into groups. You'll explain to the students that they'll rotate through different stations, and at each they'll experience a different perceptual illusion. Give the students approximately 3 to 4 minutes at each station, and then have them rotate to another station. The key point of the wrap-up is to review the creation of perceptual illusions, that they happen because our brains are trying to resolve conflicting sensory inputs. We'll get to this key point with a reflection and discussion. In the wrap-up, we'll address the question, why are our brains tricked? Our brains are tricked because they're receiving conflicting sensory information, and they are doing their best to explain this conflicting senses, which results in the illusions. The key points of the homework are to review the difference between sensation and perception and the creation of perceptual illusions. We'll get to this key point by having students complete their lab worksheets. To complete their lab worksheets, students will need to refer to the reading in their workbook for Lesson 1.4, which explains in a little more detail a current understanding of how and why the brain is creating these illusions. Students often ask for more details about the illusions. You can find more in the teacher primer, teacher manual, and student workbook. One of the most common questions teachers get is, why didn't the illusion work for me? The answer to this relates back to perception, which is the interpretation of our sensations, meaning that they will be different for different people and can be affected by experience and attention. So it's not uncommon to have students who don't experience some of the illusions, especially the phantom limb sensation with the mirror box. When that illusion is used to treat phantom limb pain, it can take several therapy sessions to establish. Another challenge with this lesson is you may not have enough time to have all of your students experience all of the stations, especially if students get into it and start really playing and experimenting with the different illusions. This is completely okay. It's not imperative that the students experience each and every station. What is important is that they experience enough to notice that many of these illusions trick our brains into believing things that aren't really there. Additionally, some teachers have found it helpful to have a second setup of each of the stations so that students can rotate more easily through them all. At the end of the lesson, students should be able to describe the difference between sensation and perception, as well as how perceptual illusions are created. And finally, students should be able to name and locate the areas of the brain responsible for processing our sensations and resolving conflicting sensory information. The fact that many brain areas are involved in basic tasks will be a key theme throughout this module. The idea of perceptual differences in our experience of our environment will be one that we revisit when we discuss pain in Unit 3. Don't forget, if you have any questions, concerns, or feedback, to let us know. You can contact any of the CTSE team members, and we'd be more than happy to help you.